Thank you very much for coming. I wonder if we could start by you sharing with me your vision for education when you became Secretary of State.
I suppose the fundamental of education is enabling every individual, whoever they are, whatever their level of capacity and quality, to get to the highest level of achievement and attainment that they themselves can. And the purpose of the education system as a whole is to try and enable that to happen. And that's what teachers are for, it's what the equipment and the books and technology is for, to help people achieve to their very best. And the question that has to be asked by every educational politician, such as I was at the time, is how can we make that happen?
Would it be right to say that you came to see technology as crucial to realising your vision for education?
When I came to understand what technology could do, one realised really what the power was. I first learned of it, funny enough, years and years and years ago when I was working at the National Union of Students and working with the Open University. And I went to a number of Open University summer schools, and the then very infant technology that was available really was helping people, particularly with special educational needs, to fulfil themselves to a level you couldn't possibly believe. When I became Education Minister, I saw first of all, again with the special educational needs, how people who otherwise were getting very little of a purchase in education were able to fulfil themselves at a very extraordinary level, and then taking it further forward to understand how for all pupils there was some enhancement of what they could do that could be established by using technology in the right way. I always felt one of the problems was, and I still think this remains a problem in some areas, is finding the right pedagogy, the right form of using technology to make sure it works in the right kind of way. And ensuring that teachers use it, understand it, are able to make benefit from it, and to focus it on pupils who can benefit from it, not pupils who can't benefit from it, still remains an issue. So I think the pedagogy still is an issue, but the fact is that technology itself absolutely has the capacity to transform educational experiences and make people able to achieve things they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do at all.
It sounds, as you were describing the Open University experience, as if there was a particular incident that you were conjuring up in your mind as you were talking about it. I wonder if I'm right about that, and if so, if you could...
It was a summer school at the University of York, and there was a Labour MP called Lewis Carter-Jones, now sadly dead, MP for Eccles, who'd made his life commitment education of people with special needs, and he'd come up and they did a show to demonstrate how some of the technology of that time, we're now talking the 1970s, was able to really make a difference to people, and he was utterly convinced, as I was, and saw if only we could make these things more widely available, then people could achieve who otherwise really had almost no hope in education at all. But I think that model applies at all levels. The question of how you do it, do you have a classroom full of PCs, personal computers? Do you have an interactive electronic whiteboard? Do you have individuals working on a tablet or even with their mobile phone working in a way that's very, very powerful? And I've now seen across the world fantastic efforts in different countries of the world where education attainment's been very low to use technology to enable people to see achievement which they simply couldn't have imagined before. And so that's been a continuum in my own life, and it makes me today an absolute committed supporter of the idea that you can use technology to enhance people's education. But the only thing I'd say, as I mentioned earlier, is that knowing how to do it, knowing the right pedagogy, knowing how to apply technological techniques to help education to particular students in their particular circumstances is what's important, and that's why I support research programs which try and understand that, because that's what's so important.
Given how fast technology is changing, why is pedagogy so slow to change?
It's very difficult. I mean, there was a time when you thought you were qualified as a teacher at the age of 21 or 22, and you thought that's all you needed for the next 40 years of your life to be a teacher. Simultaneously, the technology is moving fantastically fast, and by the way, not only the technology, the world around us in every way. And the idea that what you'd learned at the age of 21 or 22 as a teacher was enough to take you through for the next 40 years simply doesn't stack up in the modern era. But there's still many, many, many people who don't understand the need to continually upgrade, to improve your skills, to take it forward in various ways. And actually, I think that continuous professional development for teachers in Britain still is a very backward-looking part of life. It's done in a very formal and ritualistic way with the inset days and the time off from school and all the rest of it. And it could be done far more powerfully if the professional teachers took control of their own professional development, therefore learning to use the technology. My own view was that you ought to focus much more on the subject different areas. So you look at mathematics or geography or science or history or whatever it is and say in each of these areas, can we get, particularly in secondary education, the maths teachers, the geography teachers, the science teachers, whoever, to work with the technology companies to understand what can be done and what can be achieved. And I still think there's quite a long way to go before that's really achieved.
I know that personalisation is something that you were advocating in a strong way. Have you seen some really compelling examples of that in schools and colleges?
I think it's increasing, but not yet established is the right way to put it. I have seen examples in schools and colleges where students are taking themselves forward at their own pace, helped by the teacher. There's quite a lot of technology now which allows teachers to look at the level of attainment of everybody in their class electronically and understand who needs help and who doesn't. And that's not specifically the technology which is about teaching a particular subject, but it's the technology of measuring attainment and measuring achievement. And so that teachers can start to put their focus into the people who are not making progress in the way as much as they'd like to. But that is a personalised approach and looking very directly at what needs to be done and how it can be achieved. I've also seen some schools where it's very exciting. The head teacher or head of department has meetings with the pupils and with the parents, comparing what that pupil is doing with the rest of the people in the class and trying to focus on how a student can themselves commit to doing better in a particular subject or in a particular way, and how the parents can help them. And I think the role of the parents is very important in all this as well. But I'd say it's not a universal thing yet. It's quite patchy, but I have seen personalised learning making a significant difference.
So other than CPD, which is absolutely crucial for you, what are the other steps that you think we could take to help people integrate technology into their learning and teaching?
The most important thing is to understand that there are a large number of technology companies, including some very exciting young companies of people who are coming inventing new areas, which don't always relate to the curriculum, to assessment and to the various academic qualifications, which pupils, perhaps understandably, perhaps not, parents, schools are focused on, whether it's the GCs, the particular curricula or whatever it may happen to be. And I think there needs to be more of an integration between the actual curriculum and assessment that's part of that, on the one hand, and the technology which is available to help students study in those areas. There's some big developments in the United States, you're probably aware of them.
Yes.
The Texas Board of Education last summer, for example, last July, had a major program of shifting the science teaching in Texas away from the textbook to the electronic means of doing it, and on the simple economic grounds that science textbooks were costing Texas about $350 million a year, and they thought for $60 or $70 million they could do online education, which could be a lot more effective. Apart from the entertaining issues of creationism and how that's taught in Texas schools, the fact is that big companies are beginning to develop science curricula which can work in that way. Now that will be 10 years down the line really where it's moving on, and so you can see that happening more and more. So it's the CPD for teachers, it's the actual technology for particular courses, particular qualifications, and then the application of those courses on particular devices, whether electronic whiteboards, whether laptops, whether mobile phones, whatever it may happen to be.
In these days of difficult financial constraints, I often hear teachers saying, head teachers saying, we can't spend a fortune on Kindles because next year Kindles will be superseded by something else. Can schools actually afford to keep abreast of technological developments?
It's a very interesting question. The question that the hypothetical head teacher you've been talking about is describing is a real one. Technology is changing so fast. What do you commit to at a given period of time? And I think that is a genuinely difficult problem, which is why some of the discussions about open resources are very important. But it's also true that by that same very rapid process of change, the price of the kit is actually coming down very, very quickly and very substantially. If you simply look at the price of a laptop over the last 5 years, it's reduced absolutely dramatically. And so it's a question of finding the resource which can be applied on different platforms, and also bringing together what's going on in the home and what's going on in the school. I think this barrier is quite a serious problem, because many children have laptops themselves at home, but they don't use them at school. Question, why not? Could one make it easier to do it? I used to, when I was Education Secretary, to ask in every class I went into for a hand to go up for every student who had a computer at home. And even in the poorest areas, you were talking about 2/3 of the kids having a laptop, but that couldn't be used at all for their educational work because there wasn't a compatibility. So I think there's some quite interesting issues about reducing costs in that way. And so I'd say teachers, head teachers, have to look more flexibly at how they get to the equipment that's available, how they use the software which will enable that to be used, and how teachers interact more with the home and the parents of the children in their school. Even the most basic thing still doesn't happen. If you look at the extent to which teachers and parents are in email communication about what their children are doing at school, for example, what the homework patterns are or whatever it may happen to be, it's far less than it ought to be in the modern world and is in most other areas of life.
Yes. Do you want to say something about mobile technologies? 90-something% of all kids in London have a very powerful computer in their pocket, which they're not allowed to use at school.
There's some very interesting and problematic issues about mobiles. There's some interesting apps for mobiles, organisations which have been putting work in. If you go to countries like Tanzania in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a massive effort to use mobiles to reach children who otherwise have absolutely no possibility of reaching anything. And there's quite a lot of interesting work being done on that. What hasn't happened yet, but it will happen, I'm sure, in the next 2 or 3 years, is the general educational technology which is available for an app on a mobile will become more specific to particular courses and so on, and that'll be very important. Now, teachers and schools have just got to get hold of the fact that mobiles are things of the modern era. They've seen the mobile as an enemy because the mobile was taking the children's attention away from what's going on in the school. And so they banned mobiles from schools and a whole set of other measures which have happened. And of course, there have been quite serious and tricky issues about theft in schools as well. There's been some crime issues as well. But I think that the schools have to embrace the fact that young people today do have mobiles, and that the mobiles, most of them, have a capacity to help the children learn in what they're doing, and so you have to bring it together. But the idea you can somehow insulate the school from what's going on in the rest of the world and say we're going to go on like this forever, and the fact that kids have all got laptops and mobiles and all the rest of it anywhere else is nothing to do with us, I think really is putting your head in the sand in a quite unacceptable way.
I want to ask you a leading question. You sometimes hear a difference of opinion about the role of technology in learning. Some people are pleased that technology makes it easier to learn what we've always learned, and some people recognise that technology makes it possible to learn completely new things. I wonder if you had a view on that dichotomy.
Well, I support the latter by a long way. I mean, the most obvious point to illustrate it is that when I was a boy, I'm 61 now, when I was a boy, the problem was to find information. So you had an old Encyclopaedia Britannica and you'd try and find it, you'd go down the library and try and find out where it was. And the information, you had to really track it down to be able to understand it and use it. Today, all that information is available in the drop of at the push of a button. And the problem is the other way around. There's so much information that you have to find signposts and abilities to find from all the enormous amount of information that's available, what it is you want to use and how. So the educational task is fundamentally different in terms of trying to work out what you have to do. That's just a small illustration of the fact that the whole knowledge base has completely been transformed in what's going on. Now that applies at every level of education, in school and training and so on. I remember meeting the police officer who was doing a police training course to get onto his next grade in the police. And he told me what he was doing, and he was learning what the law had been 5 years before, but what the law was not now. And I thought, what on earth is going on here? This is a madness. And the obsession that people have with the processes is got to be replaced with an obsession with what is the education for, and the education has to be for what's going on in the modern world, not what was going on in the world in the past. Now, of course, they're great underlying perpetual truths about education, which don't change over time, about what you do and how you do it. But the application of those truths varies in absolutely dramatic ways.
Okay, I want to ask you one or two things about policy before we finish. I know the worst thing a researcher can say to a policymaker is, we've discovered there's a need for more research. And yet, in the TEL programme, we have uncovered lots of interesting things, but some of those interesting things are you need design, you need time to think, and test beds to try things out, and of course designing software and hardware is not cheap. We have to find some middle road on this, don't we?
Well, in a sense, the argument we need more research is absolutely a truism. It's obvious at all stages. The problem is to synchronise the research programme with the decision-taking programme, because also decisions have to be taken, and you can't put off decisions until a research is completed, because decisions still have to be taken. I believe that the key issue is for the research community to understand better what the decision-taking timetable is for government, and for government on the same, or by the same token, to understand what it is that research can offer. In the field of technology, this is truer than in any other area, because it's critically important, as the technology capacity increases all the time, that government understands what can be done. But I would say for researchers, it's important to try and conduct the experiments, understand what's happening in a way that is as timely as possible for government to take decisions in these areas. There's never a right time for any of these decisions. Things always move on, but decisions involving very large amounts of money are taken, and it's best that they're taken on the basis of the best quality research that can take place. Equally, some frustration arises in government at the inability of educational research to answer very basic questions. The one I always cite is, do smaller classes improve educational performance, which there's very little educational research on, though every politician I've ever met intuitively thinks that smaller classes are likely to work better in terms of educational performances. But there's a whole string of questions like this. In the technology area, fortunately the Technology Education Research Programme is making a contribution in this area. It will need more research because everything keeps on moving, but you have to try and link it back in to the actual practical decision-making programmes governments are deciding, and not just government, schools, local authorities, whatever, what's happening. The exciting thing today is that this really is a global issue. Every country in the world is trying to address these kinds of issues. Some of my work these days takes me to visit a number of different countries and see what's being achieved. Everybody's trying to find answers to these questions. And so there is also potential income stream from the research from other governments throughout the world trying to find out what's being done. But wherever it happens, as governments are taking decisions about very large amounts of money, what to invest in, what kind of equipment to invest in, what kind of training for teachers to invest in, and so on, that needs to be taken on the basis of research, and that requires the researchers to be aware of and understand that governments are going to have to take decisions which might not be timing-wise convenient for the research programme, but that's just a fact of life.
Okay, last question. We were both at Michael Gove's speech at BET. I won't ask you to comment on the speech itself, but
he was very nice about me, so I was very pleased.
He was extremely nice about you, even though you were trying to hide in a corner. But there's been a lot of discussion recently about children learning to program, and more generally the idea of people being not just consumers but producers of technology. And so for people like me who have been saying this for 30 years, that's very welcome. What's your view of this latest?
I haven't followed very much the spats that have taken place since his speech. I was glad he, in his speech, gave priority to technology. I thought it was a shame that the announcement was simply about the teaching of ICT rather than more widely, because my fundamental belief is technology can and should be used throughout the whole of the curriculum, and it shouldn't be seen purely as an ICT aspect. But then, of course, as you say, the question arises of how students can use their understanding of the technology to build for themselves what it is they themselves are trying to achieve. And that should be a key part of the curriculum in the way that it evolves. And to the extent Michael was trying to say that, I support him. I think, however, that part of what he was saying was that place for computing in the curriculum is only in the ICT area. And I don't agree with that. I think the computing runs through all aspects of the curriculum.
Can you say a bit more what you mean by running through all aspects of the curriculum?
Well, if you're trying to teach history, for example, using technology to enable students of history to understand about history better at all kinds of different levels is a very useful thing to do. Some of the most exciting classes I've seen taught in school on an interactive whiteboard by history teachers using it to describe in a wide variety of different ways, more powerfully than an old-fashioned blackboard could do, how history evolved has been really exhilarating. And I think that applies in every area. Obviously, people tend to think that maths and science, or maths and some of the sciences, physics perhaps, are more easy to use technology to operate in, but I think that's only very partly true. I think across the whole curriculum, technology can be used in different ways.
That's fantastic.